Chow.
Have you ever tried turning your steering wheel while your car is off and noticed that it locked? What the heck is that? And why is it so much easier to turn your steering wheel when your car is on? Today, we're going to talk a little bit about power steering and the entire system and what it does for you. So traditionally speaking, there is a steering wheel lock. Now, what the heck is that actually doing? When your key is not engaged, this little prong in your ignition pops up so that somebody who's trying to steal your car can't turn your steering wheel. Okay, so if you turn your key one click, you can overcome that steering wheel lock, but you can now see how much effort there is to turn the wheels. Can you see I'm turning up there? But it's so hard. Whereas if you engage your power steering, now we can turn the wheels easily. So let's have a quick look at what the rest of the system looks like. So this car has what's considered electronic power steering. It's not hydraulic anymore in the way that a traditional power steering setup would be. So we're going to talk about both types. An electronic power steering system does not have like a regular maintenance schedule like the old school ones would. They usually live inside somewhere here near your steering column. And like I said, that one's not maintained near as often, or sometimes manufacturers don't recommend maintaining it at all. It's one less thing that you have to maintain. So that's at least an upgrade in power steering world. So let's go have a look at a more traditional setup. So this guy right here has a very traditional power steering setup, which was hydraulic. So we have our power steering reservoir, and the power steering reservoir is attached to our power steering pump, which is run by a pulley, which is run by a belt, okay? So the belt, if that belt snaps for any reason, usually you're losing all of your accessories. So you're losing your power steering, you're losing your air conditioning, you're losing your alternator, so your car probably will stop driving very quickly, but you usually lose all of those together. So if the belt snaps and you didn't notice it, maybe one of the first things you'll notice is that your steering gets really stiff. Now, the one cool thing about power steering fluid is, check this out. Yeah, there we go. So power steering fluid is supposed to be like this nice kind of usually light color. Some manufacturers, they're kind of almost like a light pink or a red. It is incredibly important that when you are servicing a power steering system that's hydraulic, that you use the manufacturer's power steering fluid. If you use an alternate, it could cause a lot of problems with the seals. And I can tell you firsthand that car was not happy when I did that, and I had to replace a much bigger bill than I was expecting. Okay, so this is our main sensor for our power steering system. This is the high pressure lines power steering pressure sensor. So if you are experiencing issues with a sensor, or your car is letting you know that the power steering is having an issue with its sensor, it's probably linked to this guy. Okay, so we're going to have a quick look at what this power steering system looks like without all the other stuff in the way. So here is our power steering pump. Okay, the pump you can see is attached to our reservoir, and then you can follow those lines and use your deductive reasoning to notice that the top of our power steering rack and pinion here goes into where our steering column is. So our steering column, if you think about it, where we hold our steering wheel, there's a steering column that goes down, and that piece that goes down comes right into the power steering rack. Now that is something that is still a similarity between our older cars and our newer cars. So the electronic power steering still uses a power steering rack. Now, what the heck is that actually attached to? How does that make our wheels turn? Come check this out. Our power steering rack comes out on both sides to our tie rod ends, and that is literally attached to where our wheel is attached. So when we turn, this piece here is what actually moves. Okay, so our power steering system is a closed system, which means if the fluid is missing, then it's gone somewhere. So when we look at our power steering reservoir for one of those hydraulic types, you can actually see here that it has a minimum and a maximum level. So it needs to be in between that minimum and maximum. Some systems will actually have like a tiny little dipstick. I can show you that example in just a second. But if that fluid is below the minimum, then it went somewhere. So we need to figure out A, if we have a leak, or B, if it's being consumed by something. So in this case, we would just follow those hoses like we just did with our deductive reasoning and see if we can find where that little drip is happening. Okay. Another really obvious symptom of a failing power steering system is going to be when your pump starts to whine. Now, it will usually get worse when you turn the steering wheel. You'll actually hear that. If you're hearing that, check your power steering fluid ASAP, because if you can add a little bit and prevent the pump from burning out, that would be your #1 priority. If you're hearing that and you add a little bit of fluid and the noise doesn't go away, then your power steering pump is beginning to fail. I promised you I'd show you the dipstick type. So if you look here, you can see this is our power steering fluid reservoir. And when you unscrew the cap, it actually has a tiny little dipstick here that tells us when the engine is cold and then when the engine is hot, where that fluid level lives. Now, this is also a belt type. Can you see that? So this is also a belt type driven based off of the crank pulley. So if that belt snapped, all of a sudden we would not have power steering fluid. So one thing I want to leave you with is if you have a hydraulic type, it does need maintenance. We do need to change this fluid out occasionally. I would recommend doing this fluid every time that you're changing out your transmission fluid, because believe it or not, the properties out of the power steering fluid and the transmission fluid are very similar. So it'd be a really good idea to change them at the same time. For most of our Japanese vehicles, that's a 30 to 60,000 mile recommended maintenance interval. So that's all we can talk about for power steering this week. If you had specific questions or comments about your vehicle, make sure you leave it in the comments section and we'll get those answered for you.